just explain the importance for somebody who maybe has no idea about jiu-jitsu and doesn't understand just how important the Gracie family was to bringing it to the United States.
Okay, well, it's very complicated, actually. The lineage runs very deep. There's over 100 Gracie male black belts now. And many of their names start with R, but pronounced as an H. In Portuguese, when the R is in the front of the word, it's pronounced as an H. So here in America, everybody thinks that Royce's name is Royce, and Dixon is Rickson. It gets pretty complicated. But Helio Gracie, which is an H, H-E-L-I-O, is the founder of what we call Brazilian Jiu Jitsu. Original Jiu Jitsu is from Japan, around 1915 or so, give or take 5 years, I'm not sure the exact date. There was a Japanese general that was sent to Japan to help with immigration. He was a black belt Jiu Jitsu. He was good friends with Helio's father, so he sort of took the sons under his wing and started teaching Jiu Jitsu. Helio was very frail. At first he wasn't even allowed to participate in the Jiu Jitsu, but eventually he started to train a little bit, and what he discovered was many of the moves which were good were not good enough for him because he was so weak and small. So he started to put his own philosophies and modify the moves, and today we have Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu because of that.
Wow. How long have you been practicing?
19 years. Actually,
Wow.
This month makes 19 years.
And what exactly got you into doing jiu-jitsu?
Well, I was already a black belt in Tae-Kwon-Do and had always been fascinated by the martial arts, but I got kind of bored. There was a period of time after I got my karate black belt that I really became discouraged with karate because I felt like a lot of karate just didn't work. It was very, in some cases, very phony. And I say this, with great respect to all martial artists all over the world, but there are a lot of problems with traditional karate. And I just felt like when I first saw jiu-jitsu that there was maybe more truth to what they were doing. There's more realism. And after experiencing it one time, I was hooked for life.
Wow. You're talking about how you were bored with karate and you were a black belt in that as well?
Yes.
So, being that you're a black belt in jiu-jitsu, how do you set to improve yourself on a daily basis? Because I'm sure you're so highly ranked. How do you improve yourself to get even better and keep yourself from being bored?
Small increments.
Mm-hmm.
When you first start, just like maybe bodybuilding, you make big gains right away. But after, let's say, 10 years, your gains now are not huge gains, but every once in a while there's a new discovery, a new modification of an old move that changes the way that you put your jiu-jitsu together. Jiu-jitsu is very unique in the way that there are hundreds of styles within the style of jiu-jitsu, so that you're not limited by your size or the build of your body or whether you're flexible or not. There is a game in there somewhere for you. So in the course of learning the fundamentals and the basics of jiu-jitsu, you start to discover that you're pretty good in this position and you're good in that position. You start to tie these all together. So that's a never-ending process.
Mm-hmm.
So it's this constant self-discovery that you're going through in jiu-jitsu, and it keeps you fascinated.
Mm-hmm.
For instance, in typical Tae-Kwon-Do, you can get a black belt in about 18 months. In jiu-jitsu, 18 months from now, you're still a white belt in most cases.
Mm-hmm.
If you're extremely athletic, maybe you had a wrestling background or something, it's quite possible that you could get your blue belt in a year to a year and a half. But most people, it's a couple of years.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, having already had a pretty wide background in martial arts, it still took me 14 years to get a black belt in Brazilian Jiu Jitsu.
Wow.
Yeah.
Now, do you find it more beneficial for your improvement to work with someone who's at your level or better, or do you find it more beneficial to work with someone who's lesser caliber for you that you can really work the moves on?
Both. In order to improve, you have to work with someone who's at a higher level than you are so that you get the nuances of the move you're being taught. And then you want to sort of test that out on someone who's just under you. So you have to titrate your training up and down. You got to realize that if someone's under you, they're also not as educated, so they're not going to be reacting the same. But after a period of time of practicing on the lower ranks a little bit, then you want to test the waters with someone at your own speed.
Mm-hmm.
So you got to work both back and forth. They're both very useful tools.
Right. Do you have these days everyone has philosophies on overall fitness and training, and you should carbo load here and eat proteins here. strength training, endurance, you name it. Do you have like not even speaking in jiu-jitsu terms, just in general fitness, you're trying to optimize your performance as an athlete. Do you have a general rule of thumb or a philosophy or anything like that?
Yeah, it all depends on how serious you are about the sport that you're doing. I cross-train, I do some strength training, but I keep it limited because the jiu-jitsu is my primary passion. So I don't want to cross-train, or I don't want to strength train to the point where I can't jiu-jitsu train tonight.
Mm-hmm.
So I keep my routine short, like 15 to maybe 30 minutes max,
Mm-hmm.
2 maybe 3 times a week. For the average person, I would recommend just common sense eating. You don't have to be a health freak or anything like that, but stay away from junk food.
Mm.
And today we all know what junk food is. So it's not really hard to avoid sodas and chocolate and crackers.
Right.
Again, it depends on how serious you are, because if you don't eat the right fuel, you're not going to be able to perform well. And if you're cross-training in 2 different sports, you got to be really careful about what you eat. So again, it all depends on the individual. Professionals, they can afford nutritionists and personal trainers. The average person got a day job and you're working out on the side.
Of course. Can you run us through a typical day at Southside in terms of training regimen and just the daily schedule?
For myself or a student coming in?
Let's say a student coming in.
Okay, for a student coming in with no experience, typically most of the people coming there are a little bit intimidated. We got a partial cage up, so it looks like we're in MMA school, but we're not.
Mm-hmm.
And everybody else in there seems to know what they're doing, and you're the new guy, so it can be a little bit, again, intimidating for a newer person coming in. So what I try to do is just relax everyone with a calm demeanor. But we line up, we bow in like most martial arts schools do, and we do a warm-up that consists of running around the mats and a few calisthenics. Lasts maybe 6, 7, 8 minutes. And we call it a water break. And then I'll start an instruction. So typically I'll pull an assistant out and start showing a move, discuss the move for anywhere from 3 to 5 minutes, show it from several different angles. Then I'll pair people up with partners that I think are compatible to them, and by compatible I mean it's a good fit physically and the speed. You wouldn't put a black belt with a brand new white belt.
Right.
And I just make sure that as the students are doing the moves on their own, that everyone's doing it correctly. It's very important that you do it correct the first time, because if you're even the slightest bit off, the human mind wants to keep returning to the wrong way to do it even after you've been corrected. So it's really important in those first 5 attempts that you get the sequence down and the right grips and things. Otherwise we've got to break bad habits, and it can take a long time to just change the way you make a grip.
Right.
So after about maybe 10 minutes of the students practicing the move, I'll interrupt everyone, have them circle back up again. I'll show the move again. I'll add some more details. I'll address some problems that I've been seeing the students have, and then I'll send them back out to start practicing again. Typically after 2 times, I'm ready now to show plan B on that move. For instance, if you're working an arm bar and someone pulls the arm out as you're going to lock it in, then we would go to another move. So then I start to discuss how to transition into the next move. So we're sort of countering your counter to what we tried to do the first time.
Wow.
And after maybe a half an hour of instruction, we take another little water break, and then the students now are going to go live. So they're actually going to try to submit each other using not so much the techniques I showed just now, but what you've learned so far.
Right. Awesome. What would you say is it about this martial art that seems to get people really, really hooked? I mean, you hear stories about people quitting their day job and becoming really into it. I feel like more than any other sport or martial art or a fitness regimen even. Like, what is it besides the obvious benefits of fitness levels and learning to protect yourself? What is it that seems to get people really hooked on this martial art?
Well, it's there's several answers to that question, and I know some people that have quit some very important careers, lawyers that have quit practicing law to do jiu-jitsu.
Incredible.
Which is crazy when you think about that. It's very primal. As human beings, we've been wrestling basically since we were on the planet. So I think that it gets everybody deep down in your primal instinct somewhere. You just enjoy grappling. If you watch the primates, the monkeys are always grappling. Little kids that have never been taught anything, they're out rolling in the grass and they're laughing the whole time they're doing it. It's just something about it that hits us deep down. It's also very chess-like When you get beyond the basics, when you get 2, 3, 4 years in, and you're not thinking about the very basic maneuvers, you're now starting to plan strategies, and you're trying to stay 1 to 2 steps ahead of your opponent. So if you're very intelligent, this is a great sport for intellectuals.
Mm-hmm.
If you're physical, you like to compete, it's got that too. So I think it's just got this great package, especially for guys. I mean, I've got some girls that are really, really good, but for the most part right now, the sport is pretty much male dominated.
Mm-hmm.
And again, it appeals to us on a very primal level.
Mm-hmm. You got anything?
Yeah, I can go. Here, let's receipts. Yeah, as Miles said, a little bass to it. Yeah, there are women that train at Southside and are pretty good. And I mean, I remember one day that girl Sam came by.
Oh, she's unbelievable.
She trains at Philadelphia. She's a black belt. She's weighs probably 115 pounds soaking wet.
That's about right.
And
she started with me when she graduated high school. She's going to go to college. Her dad called me up this many years ago, and he said, you know, my daughter's going to be leaving. I'd feel a lot better if she knew how to defend herself. So she started on a women's self-defense course that I had. It was just a 12-week program, and she liked it so much, she put college off for a year. Said, I want to sign up in your regular sport jiu-jitsu program. A year went by. She decided, I'm not even going to do college. And now she's, I think she does Thai massage. She lives in Philadelphia. She trains full-time. When she was a purple belt, she was ranked number 2 in the world as a purple belt. Now, she's not been a black belt that long, and she's won a couple of tournaments, but she's not quite achieved that status as a black belt. But she will. She's very good and very dedicated.
And I know some people out there might be thinking, you know, Luke, that's all well and good, but a 115-pound girl is not going to be able to do anything to me. I weigh 210 pounds. I'm a grown man. But I beg to differ, because we did this drill we call a Shark Tank drill. So you put one person at each corner of the mat, you know, and then you have a line of people waiting to enter in and face each of the people that are positioned on the mat. And now you go through this drill, you basically try to get 2 points on the person, sometimes called a 2-point drill. So the goal is not to submit the person, but simply to pass their guard. If you've ever seen a high school wrestling match, to take their back, to score 2 in terms of jiu-jitsu. So, you know, the people who stay in, who are able to win and score 2 points on the person entering, they stay, and then the person who loses gets to the back of the line, and it filters through like that. So the best people, that's why it's called a Shark Tank, remain in the middle, just getting fed people.
Yeah, sort of like King of the Hill.
King of the Hill, yeah. And so this woman that we're talking about, who's a black belt in Brazilian Jiu Jitsu, even though she only weighs 115 pounds, even though she's a woman, was able to just stay in her position for the entire duration of the drill because of her technical skill in Jiu Jitsu, being able to pass my guard, pass other blue belts guards that are, you know, athletic young men, outweighing her by 20, 30 pounds. And this is something that is not exclusive to her. I mean, black belts in Jiu Jitsu are 1%ers, you would say, for sure.
Yeah, that's the statistics, 1%.
And then there's a 1% to that black belt level. So you have your black belts, and then you have people who are outliers. People like, correct me if I'm wrong, like BJ Penn, who got his black belt in 3 years. As Miles said, it took him 14 years already being a black belt in another martial art, and that's usually about average. I mean, that's probably a little above average.
There's a lot of controversy on BJ Penn. It depends on what you read. I've read 3 years, I've read 5 years.
Right, either way.
Now, he was also very wealthy.
Right.
His parents had a lot of real estate in Hawaii, and he was able to take private lessons 8 hours a day, 5 days a week.
Right.
Very few people can afford that, and private lessons are about $150 an hour.
Right. So that's why they call BJ Penn the prodigy, because it seemed as though, you know, he had all this money and affluence, and his family didn't need to fight. But like you said, that also buys the time that you need, and that's really
he was unbelievably talented. I mean, he's a rare case.
Right, and so is Javier.
Mendez.
Javier. Is it Mendez or Rodriguez? I think it's Rodriguez. Mendez is the coach. Rodriguez is the jiu-jitsu player, I think.
The Mendez brothers. There's Rafa Mendez and Guy Mendez.
Okay. Javier Mendez. Yeah,
they're considered 2 of the best in the world right now.
Right on.
They're about 140, 145 pounds.
Right, he got his black belt really quick too, right?
All those guys. I mean, they're from Brazil, with the exception of BJ, and you know they're training at top academies with top guys. When you've got top guys to roll around with all the time, you're going to learn at a very fast rate. And that's one of the things in America. You know, it wasn't even here when I first started 19 years ago, and I told people jiu-jitsu. They said, "What is that again?" It was 10 years before anyone knew what I was talking about.
Mm-hmm. To this day, they all think that it involves punching. That I'm, gonna like. I come home with I had a black eye the other day. Not a bad black eye, but just a little tiny bruise above my eye, just from getting during a transition with another low level belt jiu-jitsu player, another white belt, who sometimes when you are new to the sport and you're involved with somebody else who's also new to the sport, you forget the aspect of jiu-jitsu that is most important, which is the gentleness of it.
And the technique and position. White belts typically flail around a little bit.
And in technique and position, you're able to not use, your speed and power as much, and you're able to just use the efficiency of the maneuvers to dominate your opponent. And sometimes, people like me who are new to the sport, we forget this and end up in a position where, you catch an elbow, or you catch just in transition, just a little tap. So I had a bruise, and I come home and they're like, "Oh, what, did somebody punch you? What did somebody, would you get kicked in the face?" And I'm like, "No, it's grappling." Well, how'd you get a black eye? I'm like, well, because in grappling, things happen where sometimes you end up getting scratched a little bit. But for the most part, what people like about jiu-jitsu is you can train it at full clip. You can completely attack the person that you're training with that day and not have to worry about hurting them for the most part.
That's correct. It's the only sport you can go 100% and not worry about injury. You can't do that in boxing. You can't do that in karate. Maybe in wrestling you could go 100%. But in jiu-jitsu, and that's one of the reasons why jiu-jitsu has risen to the forefront of martial arts so fast as a combat sport, is because we, as a group of jiu-jitsu practitioners, we can go 100% without gear. People in karate cannot do that. They have to have headgear, groin cup, mouthpiece, hand and foot pads. You're like the Michelin man out there trying to spar. And so the other thing is with karate, and I'm not knocking karate, I spent 20 some years in karate, but this is the pitfalls of karate. With all that protective gear on, people start to get used to trading punches with each other. In a real fight, you cannot trade punches. One good punch in the fight is over. If you're not knocked out, you're incapacitated to the point where the other person could now overwhelm you with punches and kicks. So they get this false sense of, I can trade punches with you. Some people in karate are willing to take a punch to give a punch, and that is a terrible strategy in a fight. In jiu-jitsu, we're always fighting for the dominant position, and we can go 100% without worrying about injuring each other, outside of an occasional accidental bump of the elbow, as you mentioned earlier, with a black eye, or a scratch, or an abrasion or something, like a rub burn you get from the mat. Mm-hmm. But it's still relatively safe in comparison to other combat sports.
And you've been in lots of jiu-jitsu competitions, right?
Yes, I have.
Is there any loss that you might have had where you still think, 97, Bobby Jones, the white whale?
Yeah, my last competition was 2012. As a black belt, it was my first competition, and I went out for the world title. And it's a big deal because it was the first time in this country that they'd ever had the Worlds held here, which they used to call the Mundials, which means Worlds, in Brazil. And they swore they'd never bring that tournament to the United States, but eventually they did. We've got more money over here. It's just, it's a better place to have a tournament. Mm-hmm. So now all the important tournaments are, not all of them, most of the important tournaments are held here. So in 2012, the IBJJF, which is the International Brazilian Jiu Jitsu Federation, decided that they were going to have the World's Championships here, and I entered. I entered the open weight division, which I'm only 140 pounds. Open weight means it's open to anyone. Mm-hmm. So my first opponent was Idibor Ferreira, and he outweighed me by 40-some pounds, I think. And he was also many times world champion, and I wasn't really sure what was going to happen when I went out there. I knew I was in good shape. I felt like technique was pretty good. I just wanted to see where I stood, where I measured up with the best guys in the world. So, fortunately for me, I was able to submit Idibor in just over a minute, caught him in a choke. I won my first match. My second match, I fought a guy named Gustavo, and Gustavo Enrique was 190 pounds, so he was 50 some odd pounds, because he was 190 some change, bigger than me, and I didn't do as well against him. He was, I underestimated him, to be honest. I didn't give him enough respect. I was doing well at first, and then I did a little something. I made a small mistake, which he capitalized on. He caught my arm, and rather than tap, I was trying to get out of the arm lock, and it broke my elbow, completely dislocated.
Oh, wow.
Broke 2 bones, tore a lot of tendons and ligaments, and it set me back for a little while.
Really? Is that something you dwell on a lot? Do you have
No,
the entire
you know,
fight in your head?
I got a pretty cool trophy or medal rather for third place in the world. That's a pretty big accomplishment.
I'd say, yeah.
If I never do anything again, I'm in the history books.
Yeah.
And that was cool for a little guy, a relatively unknown guy on the circuit to be able to go out there and do that. I felt pretty proud of that. So had I had it to do all over again, I just would have tapped instead of trying to get out of the mood, because I still would have got third place for the loss, and I wouldn't have had to suffer that horrible injury and sit on the sidelines for a while. So it was,
And that was 2012?
that was 2012, and you know, my elbow won't straighten out now. There's no pain, no discomfort, but it won't completely straighten out. I probably lost maybe 5 to 8% range of motion there. But other than that, I'm fine.
Is there any possibility you're going back into competition?
I'm thinking about it. You know, it's a big step. You know, training for that thing. I went into that tournament a beat up old man, basically. I had popped a rib. This is all the training that leads up to it. I popped a rib. I pulled a groin muscle. I had both of my elbows were already killing me from the training, and I tore a meniscus in my knee, but I didn't know that yet. I just knew my knee was bothering me. I also had pulled a muscle in my stomach. So I had like five nagging, not real bad, but 5 nagging injuries that were causing me to be very cautious as I was moving around. And sometimes in jiu-jitsu you need to explode from position. You can't be too cautious. But when you're injured like that, you know, you don't want to make things worse. Certainly fighting a guy 50 pounds bigger than you, you cannot afford to be injured. But you know, the training is worse sometimes than the actual match. And many sports are like that. You know, you go through hell to get to the point to be ready to compete on a world level, and then sometimes the fights are easy, or sometimes you go to the hospital.
So I was wondering, like, Bittman was asking if you were dwelling on that. Do you remember like the set of the scene for you entering the Worlds? Were you known? Did anybody think that you were going to be an easy match? How are you perceived, and how did you feel perceived entering?
Well, you know, I can't speak for my opponents, but I know how I feel, and you really cannot judge a book by its cover. I've seen some portly looking people that you think, oh man, this guy. And then you watch him and they're like, oh my God, I can't believe how smooth that guy is, how sharp he is, and how well he plays jiu-jitsu. You can see a real skinny guy, and that skinny guy could be extremely strong, very limber, or he could be real stiff and slow and sluggish. You never know. I've fought guys that are fast that I've beaten. I've fought guys that are fast that have beaten me. I've fought guys that are slow that I've beaten. I've fought slow guys that have beaten me. So again, you can't judge a book by its cover. Now, I'm sure from my opponent's perspective, they're certainly not afraid of me, as small as I was entering the open weight division. There was guys in there that went 350, close to 400 pounds. I didn't draw those guys. Had I won that match, I would have fought a guy that went 275. But I was watching him fight earlier, and I thought, okay, I can handle this guy, but I didn't get far enough in the tournament. So again, back to your original question, I don't think these guys were worried that much about me when they saw me in the bullpen. But if they're like me, they're thinking, well, you never know. So you can't discount someone. And the other thing is, you got to remember, we're all black belts in there. So there's no easy matches at the black belt level, and especially for the world title. You're fighting cream of the crop from every country. In the division I was in, there was people from Russia, Canada, Japan, and Brazil that I know of. There's 13 individuals in the open weight.
You throw Iran into there, and that is the vicious circle of grappling countries. You know, Japan, Russia, known for grappling.
Middle East got a huge program right now.
Yeah.
Canada has got a big program. Japan is all about it. It's taking the world by storm.
Yeah, I mean, the internationality of jiu-jitsu is, I think, something that is maybe being promoted a little bit by its American acceptance. Would you agree? Like that?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It exploded once it got to America. I mean, it sat dead in the water probably for 20 years in obscurity in Southern California with Hicks and Gracie. Hoy and Gracie was out there. This is before the UFC. Hoyce moved out there. The Machado brothers, which are cousins to the Gracies, they moved to California. So you had this big immigration, this Brazilian immigration occurring mostly in Southern California, but some in Florida, and still no one had heard of it. But after the UFC, all of a sudden it's on the map. And then people like myself that didn't know about it but were very into martial arts, we want to see what this new thing is. And as the karate world starts to get into jiu-jitsu, they start to realize the pitfalls in their own system. And all over the United States, karate schools are starting to now incorporate jiu-jitsu into their program. They're not giving up on karate, but they're now bringing in the ground game. And it still took another 20 years after that for the mainstream public to know the word jiu-jitsu, which people still have a hard time saying the word. But you're not hearing Brazilian Jiu Jitsu as much. Now it's just Jiu Jitsu. In the very beginning, everyone was adamant about throwing Brazilian in front of the word Jiu Jitsu because we didn't want to get confused with Japanese Jiu Jitsu, where it came from.
Who was the man who originally taught Helio Gracie in Japan? Was that how do you say
Well,
that?
he didn't teach Helio. He taught Helio's father and his uncles.
Okay.
And they taught the brothers, Helio and his brothers. And Helio was sort of the last to learn because he was very sickly, he was anemic, he would have fainting spells. So they didn't let him go to school. They pulled him out of school, and for years he didn't have to do any chores around the house. He just was the skinny little brother that never got to do anything. So he would sit and watch jiu-jitsu, watch his brothers teach. They taught for a living, and they did mostly private lessons back then with very prominent like bankers and politicians in Brazil. So Helio, he didn't even have to sweep the mats or anything. They were he's going to faint all the time. So one day, one of the brothers didn't show up for a private lesson with the banker, and Helio, knowing the family needed the money, didn't want the banker to leave, and he said, "Oh, here, I can give you the lesson." And he looked at young Helio, and he's like, "Well, I didn't think you did." He said, "Oh, yeah, I know how to do it." Well, he'd been sitting there for years watching the lessons. So he sort of faked his way through the lesson, but he had a knack for breaking the move down, and the guy liked the way that Helio showed the move, described the move. And when the brother who was late for the private finally showed up, he apologizes to the banker, says, "Well, let's get your lesson started." And the banker says, "Well, no, actually, young Helio has already given me the lesson, and if it's okay with you, I'd prefer that he be my instructor from now on." Now, this was Helio's first attempt ever at jiu-jitsu, but the banker didn't know that. So when the banker left, Helio and the brother have the conversation, and now they allow Helio to continue because the banker now has asked for him, and they don't want to piss him off, right? So Helio now gets to get out on the mat, and he starts to experiment with the moves because, again, where he wasn't allowed to play sports his whole life, I think Helio was 16, 17 at this point, he hadn't developed. So he was a very frail-looking man, and he's doing these moves, and they're not quite working all that well for him. He's struggling with the stronger guys, and he starts to adapt different angles and leverages and experimenting with grips, and he made it better. Over a period of time, he took over the system from his brothers. They all relinquished to him, and he became the leader. And again, he's always adapting. He starts experimenting with his own sons, his cousins, his nephews. It's like the whole family just starts to get into this, and they all come together because it's a family business. And Helio's the leader of it all. He was very innovative. And he had a brother, Carlson, who eventually took off in his own direction and put his spin on things. And he had a lot of influence on jiu-jitsu. So between those two guys, they took the 2,000-year-old traditional Japanese jiu-jitsu system and turned it into a devastating chess game of a martial art.
Yeah, I mean, and when he says chess game, he's not lying. There are moments where the other thing about jiu-jitsu is the focus that it requires, I think, to be involved in a live role with somebody, whether they are, somebody like Miles, who's a black belt, who rolling with him is, essentially the most beneficial thing that I think you could have happen to you in the time that you spend training that day, because he is going to only allow things that are perfect technique to work on him. And he's not going to shut you down, even though your perfect technique still might not be able to beat his 50% technique at this point, but he will still allow you to work through your technique and pass his guard if you're doing the correct technique. And then when you slip up, that's when you get caught in a submission, and that's how you learn that that was a slip up. Now, through training with people like Miles, or especially people who are at the purple belt or blue belt level when you're a white belt or a blue belt, because like I said, the further down you go in terms of belt rank, the more fast-paced it seems to be, as guys are more willing to or I guess I should say less willing to have the passive approach. When you're a lower belt rank, you're more inclined to get into a very fast-paced, intense role. And during this time, when you're in this state of focus and cardiovascular, output, you can get into these states, and sometimes in these states, you feel as though you're getting a peek behind the curtain. Maybe you see something that just illuminates your mind with the whole picture of jiu-jitsu for a second, and like deja vu, it's gone. And that, I don't know if that's ever happened to you at a low, I'm sure it has. At a low level, when you were going through it, you would just get these flashes where you kind of see the whole picture for a second, and then it goes away almost. And at one point, I was, getting back to the chess game analogy, I was in one of these states, and I just kind of had this thought that jiu-jitsu is untangling knots.
Basically, that's a pretty good expression. The word epiphany sometimes is overused, but you have a lot of epiphanies in jiu-jitsu, and typically, not just for me, a lot of people will say this, it's on the way home. You got your ass kicked. Can I say that?
Yeah.
You're good.
You get your ass kicked real bad. And, it's funny because, like most guys, I'm very competitive, and I hate losing anything. But losing in jiu-jitsu is not losing, and I never minded that all those years. And it's not like I don't lose today, because I've got some students that are really good, and I make a mistake, I get caught, I got to tap like everybody else. But when I was first coming up and I was losing, it would make you laugh. Someone chokes the snot out of you, and you tap, and you laugh. God, I can't believe I did that again. And you keep making these same little mistakes over and over again until eventually, even the dumbest guy in the room spots the choke coming, but he doesn't know what to do about it. So in time, you start to develop these automatic reactions, almost like intuitive. You have an intuitive sense of what's about to happen. The more experience you have, the calmer you get. New people, they look like newborn deers. They're stumbling all over the place, hitting everybody in their way, and all elbows and knees. But just like a newborn deer, if you keep watching this white belt over time, like a time-lapse camera, you're going to see that clumsy deer all of a sudden gain its footing and start walking and then running very gracefully. But that time-lapse camera takes maybe 2 years for the white belt to become that person. Up to that point, you're not thinking of anything except getting the other guy, trying to avoid being tapped, and you tend to get really wild about that. Mm-hmm. The seasoned guys are very calm, almost like they're drinking a cup of coffee as they're rolling around with someone, barely even trying, and yet they have all their wits about them. Mm-hmm. And I compare this a lot of times to driving a car. When you first get your license and start driving a car, you got 2 hands on a wheel, 10 and 2. You don't want to turn the radio on. You don't want to look in the rear view mirror. You don't dare talk to your buddy. But eventually, you're on the cell phone. You're not supposed to be. You're driving, one-handed, radio blasting, windows down, hollering at people you see on the side of the street as you're changing lanes. The more you do jiu-jitsu, the more comfortable you become. You can start to multitask a little bit.
Mm-hmm. Do you have a moment in mind where you really, that comfort really kind of settled in? Obviously, the belt system is a good way of indicating that. But was there like a moment where you hit a move and you're like, oh, wow, I just hit that. Like, I think I'm really getting it,
Well, I don't sound cocky, but, after 19 years, I've had 1,000 moments like that.
Right,
Not
right.
one really stands out in my mind.
Mm-hmm.
But what does stand out in my mind is maybe the first few times you get stuck somewhere underneath of someone. You're very uncomfortable, twisted up. Maybe they're on top of you in a way you can't breathe good. In the beginning, you get paranoid. You get a little claustrophobic. You'll tap sometimes just from being in an uncomfortable position. Mm-hmm. But after a period of time, you become much calmer because the person's not going to kill you. So even if you're being choked, if the choke is not truly on, if you have experience, you won't tap. You will very calmly start to think about what you need to do, exactly what you need to do to get out of this position. Versus in the beginning, you just sort of clawing at the guy's hands, trying to stretch your neck up for oxygen. And after, I don't know, it's different for everyone. Some people calm down right away. Some people take a year or two. But when you get calm, you don't flip out. Mm-hmm. You start to very intelligently work your fingers around the wrist or the collar, or you change the angle of your neck to buy yourself more time as you're trying to untie this knot, as Luke had said.
Mm-hmm. We were talking about the UFC before, and obviously this might be relatable more to a good amount of our listeners. What is your take on the UFC? I know a lot of traditional martial artists kind of stay away from it. Other guys, they're really into it. Why is that? Why do a lot of more traditional martial artists kind of look away from the UFC? You would think that these are the best guys in the world. Like, why?
Well,
why,
they're definitely the best fighters in the world. But here's what's happened. Again, this is my take on it. I think a lot of people in Jiu-Jitsu, the dyed-in-wool guys, would agree with me. In the beginning, we all loved the UFC. Not for the blood and the guts, but it was the proving grounds for Jiu-Jitsu. So those first 3 to maybe even all the way up to 10, Jiu-Jitsu dominated. When I say up to 10, I'm talking about UFC 1, 2, 3, 4. Royce Gracie was definitely the driving force behind Jiu-Jitsu in the beginning, but then he stepped down, and you started to have now a wave of these wrestlers come through, the ground and pounders, where this all came from. And ground and pound sort of dominated for a while. And then Jiu-Jitsu came back again, and all of a sudden the Jiu-Jitsu practitioners now look like bodybuilders. So each sport that dominated caused all of the other combat sports to go back to the drawing board and reinvent their martial art. The karate people never did too well in Jiu-Jitsu. Boxers never did well. Wrestlers did. And when you had guys that were combining wrestling with Muay Thai, with Jiu-Jitsu, that's when the sport really took off. And now almost every camp, every serious camp that has UFC fighters, they're not training just Jiu-Jitsu. They're not training just the striking. They're training what I mentioned before, all 3. The important factors here are wrestling, Jiu-Jitsu, and striking. And when I striking, typically it's Muay Thai. You've got some guys with judo backgrounds that like to get to a clinch for the throw, but that's hard to pull off in UFC. But here's what's happened. You're going to hear Joe Rogan a lot of times, and I have respect for Joe. Joe's a black belt under Eddie Bravo, but these guys, these commentators, are too quick to say someone's discipline is jiu-jitsu. And then when you have the high-level jiu-jitsu guys watching these fights, you're thinking, he would never be a black belt in my school. So what you've got is, there's now 2 jiu-jitsus. There's an MMA jiu-jitsu, and then there's sport jiu-jitsu. And it's real easy to tell the difference between the two when you see the guys compete, because the MMA jiu-jitsu is what we call loose. There's too much space. They don't fully understand how to control the opponent. They've just took some of the components of jiu-jitsu. These aren't guys that would ever be able to last on a competition circuit in jiu-jitsu.
Right.
So it's, they've took like the meat and potatoes of jiu-jitsu, your basic arm locks and chokes, and worked that into a stand-up game. And they're formidable opponents, but to say this guy's background is jiu-jitsu, that's overused in MMA right now.
Do you know of any fighters in the sport where you're like, yeah, he's
Oh, hell yeah. Damian Maia is unbelievable. He's also a several-time world title holder in IBJJF Sport Jiu-Jitsu. BJ Penn, who you mentioned earlier, definitely legit black belt. The Diaz brothers, very good. You got Jacare. You got Shinya Aoki. Of course, Sakuraba was a phenom back in the day. Chrome Gracie, which is Hickson's son, has been in MMA now for, I think, 6 months to a year. He's over in Japan. You've got Rodolfo Vieira, who just announced his MMA debut. This guy is a beast, several times world champion black belt IBJJF. You've got a lot of women. Mackenzie Dern now is going MMA. Gabby Garcia. These are all phenomenal black belts that I'm talking about. Gabby Garcia, she's like 6'1" from the Amazon. She's a legitimate black belt. She just went MMA. The whole MMA world is about to get turned upside down in the next 2 years by the new level of jiu-jitsu people that are coming into this. The old jiu-jitsu people were, the new jiu-jitsu is much more athletic. The guys are in way better shape. The technique has revolutionized to a level that's just unbelievable to the average person who doesn't understand jiu-jitsu. See, here's the other thing. Boxing has been around for hundreds of years. Wrestling, arguably, for thousands of years. So when they came into the UFC, they didn't have a whole lot of stuff to fix. Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu has only really been around since about 1920 something. So we've had maybe 100 years, 90 some years of being able to hone this art. And now that it's in the octagon, we're starting to see the problems that sport jiu-jitsu has had. So now you have sort of a UFC type mentality for the jiu-jitsu where you don't want to pull half guard. You don't want to, you know what I mean? There's certain positions in sport jiu-jitsu just don't make sense when you're fighting. Mm-hmm. So the guys today that have figured that out are taking jiu-jitsu to a new level. And as I was saying earlier, what you're going to see in the next couple of years, you're going to see a major change in the players in the UFC. They're going to be jiu-jitsu based guys.
Wow, that's awesome.
Yeah, and there's a lot of them coming up the pipeline.
That's exciting.
What you were saying before about taking it to the UFC and how the very short amount of time that it's been around, bringing it to the stage that is the UFC has allowed for the improvements, the very small but necessary improvements needed to hone the martial art. And I was actually talking to a philosophy professor here, and he was pretty ignorant about martial arts as a whole, but he was attempting to unpackage the thought behind martial arts in the same way he would unpackage a religion, and just basically kind of understand what is good about it, what is bad about it, in terms of like, you know, a rational moral view of it or whatever. And you know, he was saying that this isn't his view, but some people in the philosophy realm have this idea that competition is bad, and that competition is you know, not good, and they kind of don't like how the UFC puts people in a position where they knock each other unconscious, you know, over money in their mind or whatever. But what you just said highlights the importance of the counter argument to that, I think, which is that it's kind of like making a diamond. It needs a lot of pressure, and you need to put two seemingly unstoppable forces against one another and see where what's left in the wake, see what's left in the rubble to sort of like you said, it's as the same way a biologist and a chemist and other scientists get together and exchange notes in a conference to take science and our understanding of the fundamental level of things on the planet to the next level. Martial arts now has a scientific laboratory, even though the UFC has its flaws. You know, traditional purists will say that you can't eye gouge or you can't grab somebody's testicles, and then that makes it not pure martial arts. But for the most part, anybody who's watching what's occurring is realizing that out of this tremendous competition, the focus and discipline required to overcome this obstacle that will be your opponent is so intense that it's elevating the sport to the next level.
That's correct, and it's exactly what it is. It's a laboratory. It's not just UFC. That's the big name. There's a lot of circuits out there. Mm-hmm. You've got Bellator, King of the Cage. There's a lot of circuits. UFC right now is the biggest. It needs to pay more money. These guys are going in here, they're training, they're giving up careers, they're getting injured, you know, where you can't do anything else. You got about 7 or 8 years of professional life in you once you turn pro, because the training and the fights that you're going to have are going to take so much out of your body that very few people can continue after 7 or 8 years. And these guys are barely making $100,000 a year. How are you going to live later? How are you going to feed your family, pay your bills after only 7 or 8 years in the circuit? So the UFC needs to really seriously consider retirement plans. They've got the sponsors, they're making all the money, they need to kick some of that back to the fighters, because they're wearing the fighters out. And okay, you got, you know, there's a big line of guys wanting to get in the UFC, but as a sport, I think Dana White needs to more seriously consider the longevity of these fighters. You want to keep them around to be sports commentators for you, trainers at other camps. There needs to be something thought of beyond the first 7 or 8 years of a fighter when he's not able to get in the ring anymore and pack the crowds in. Mm-hmm. So I think that's something that really needs to be considered. I mean, football players, baseball players, these guys make so much money that when they finally retire, they don't have to worry about anything. You know, they're taken care of. And yet, UFC is the most watched sport on football. I mean, it blew away the Super Bowl. There was more people in the stadium in Japan watching the UFC than there was the Olympics. And yet these guys can't make $100,000 a year. It's not right.
Yeah, no, it's not.
No, there's no reason, I think, to not argue that everybody who signs a contract to the UFC should get, at minimum, a teacher's salary, $30,000 to $40,000 a year just for training. That should be completely removed from their fight pay. You know, just give them a base salary so that they can pay their bills during the training camp, and then that way, if something happens during training camp, an injury, they have the UFC to cover them for the insurance already. That's great, but then they have, you know, a little safety net. to continue training. And they have guys that are also affiliated with the UFC in their gym that they will still be able to benefit the UFC in some way being on the sidelines. But, when you look at the UFC, like, think about it like this. They have to start looking at their fighters. Like, they have a John Jones now, right?
Yep.
John Jones is their mega draw, their superstar, and they have a lot of money invested in him. So if he gets hurt at this point, that doesn't do any good to them to make money. But you have to think about the residual impact of his training leading up to the point where he's now a superstar. He's not coming into superstardom unscathed. He's coming into superstardom with injuries from times when he was only making $1,000 a month to be a regional MMA fighter. So if you can identify this talent early on, you got to understand that, this guy who might be at a regional level now that you're paying pennies could someday be a Ronda Rousey-like draw that you don't want to have 5 concussions under his belt from poor training and mismanagement of his camp. Now at you're taking a car that at this point isn't worth a lot, but in 5 years is going to be a classic. It's just going to turn over and it's going to be worth millions of dollars. And you're driving it down a dusty highway, basically, essentially, to go back to the car analogy.
Yeah, you got to take care of your fighters. You got big sponsors out there. You got Budweiser, Harley Davidson, you got Nike. Every major corporate company has got money tied into the UFC, but not enough of them are taking care of the fighters. They're just, they want their name out there in lights too, but they need to start taking care of the fighters because that's the future of the sport. Your big names, Ronda Rousey, Chuck Liddell, and Chuck's retired now, but, Conor McGregor, these guys, they don't have to pay for anything. Everywhere they go, their meals are comped, their entry fees are paid for, their travel expenses are paid for, their hotels are paid for. But what about the hundreds of up-and-coming people? There's money out there to start to recruit these guys, put in, health plans and insurance policies together for them to take care of them should they get injured. It's very risky. You got people that are going there risking whether you walk with a limp for the rest of your life. Every fight could be a debilitating injury which could end your career. Mm-hmm. You can't be going in there for $20,000 a fight, and that's about what they make, $20,000 to $50,000 the average guy in the UFC, unless you're fighting for the title. If you're already a big name, you get a bigger ticket. Mm-hmm. But you're not getting these $9 million paydays like Floyd Mayweather gets.
No.
Well, why not? Why not? The sport is bigger than boxing. The guys that are training in jiu-jitsu arguably are training as hard as anyone on the planet. There was a Gallup poll years ago, and I don't know what the stats are now, but Gallup poll does most of the polls. They ranked number 1 for cardiovascular in the world. Number 1 was jiu-jitsu. It used to be cross-country skiing and racquetball. Jiu-jitsu moved into the number 1 spot.
Wow.
I think now that possibly MMA has taken that spot. I'm not saying boxers don't train hard. Of course they do. One of the hardest workouts there are is a heavy bag. But what I'm saying is you've got, and I've got friends that box, and I'm not trying to insult any of those guys, but there's no way a professional boxer can beat a black belt. A mediocre black belt in jiu-jitsu could beat a world champion boxer. Because boxing's too limited. The guys got their elbows up too high. Jiu-jitsu guys just wants to take you down. So if you're worried about getting hit in the face fighting a jiu-jitsu guy, you're going to get taken down and submitted. So why are we not being rewarded? Why is it not paying more money? Why do boxers get the $9 million paydays? We have a wider viewing audience on the UFC. It's because the UFC is keeping the money.
Yeah. It's like Steve Martin said, you have to be undeniable. You have to be, in the minds of the public consciousness, I think at this point, you need to be, before the knockout, a Ronda Rousey, where people just are, they are captivated. She's not going to lose. She's never going to lose, And then that happens. Then people come up to me, because I'm the person they know who likes MMA, and they go, Luke, you told me Ronda Rousey was never going to get beat.
And then there's the whole controversy. She got beat by a boxer, so all your boxer buddies, yeah, see there, man, I told you. She got cocky. Her striking, it was never that good. It's hilarious. I'm like, do you know the other girl was undefeated too? Do you know they both were undefeated? So at the end of that fight, one of them was not going to be undefeated any longer. Well, does that mean the other one is... When Royce Gracie made a big mistake, and he came back to fight Matt Hughes.
Oh, yeah.
All right, now Matt was a stud. He was in his prime. World-class wrestler, is now also training jiu-jitsu. Royce had been on a big seminar tour, okay? He was not in fighting shape. He did it for the money. Royce got $1 million for that fight. Matt Hughes got $300,000 because Royce was the draw on the fight. But Royce looked really bad. and he lost. And I mean, he was controlled the entire time. So a good friend of mine comes to me right away. Yeah, look what happened to Hoist Gracie. He got beat. I said, yeah, and the guy beat him with a jiu-jitsu move. So what does that tell you about jiu-jitsu? Jiu-jitsu changed the entire world, the way that they look and think about training for fighting. They're all training jiu-jitsu. So Hoist's point was proved that you beat me with my own move.
Nah, Matt Hughes will tell you that was good old American wrestling, Miles.
No, he won on Kimura. Kimura's Japanese jiu-jitsu.
Alright, we're wrapping up in the last couple of minutes of the show. We usually like to talk to our guests about their musical preference. So do you have like a specific genre, like from, I don't know, I can't
I like
even...
classic, old school classic, maybe Southern rock.
Okay, so like what are we talking?
Right up our alley.
We're talking like
Creedence
Leonard Skinner.
Clearwater.
Oh yeah.
Creedence Clearwater, if you got that. I like Crosby, Stills, and Nash.
There we go. Yeah, we're
Yeah.
definitely big proponents of that style of music around these parts.
Nice.
Because, yeah.
You want to get a song queued up and we'll wrap this up?
we'll wrap it up.
So, just wrapping up, everybody. This is Miles Moffit, Southside Jiu Jitsu head instructor and black belt, first degree. And he's coming on the show this morning to talk about the club that he started here on campus, that students here started. Myself, Cedric Bryant, who is a purple belt under Lloyd Irving. If that name sounds familiar, it's because
that kid's world class. I'll tell you that right now.
he has trained many people who fought in the UFC. Lloyd Irving and Cedric, I believe, was #1 in the world at age 19.
That's what I read.
So Ced's probably going to be a big leader in the club coming up as I graduate, and we're looking to take this club to the next level. So if you're serious about grappling, martial arts in any way, shape, or form, you need to come to Southside Jiu Jitsu. Come for one class. I promise you'll be hooked. It's never been more economic to start doing Jiu Jitsu here in Salisbury. We have a great deal. The semester rate is down to $150 for the entire semester. Now let's break that down. That is the cheapest rate you will find anywhere, and it is tailor-made for college students. We do not give you all 4 days of the week to train, but I know from my experience being a college student, sometimes you don't have 4 days a week that you can train.
You got 3 days a week to train, and if you do the math on that, the average person coming in is going to pay $125 a month. At $150 a semester, that's less than $50 a month to train 3 days a week, which is all you need. Unless, if
2 hours each day as well.
Yeah, if you're going to school, you don't have time to train more than 3 days a week. You got to work, you got to sleep, you got to eat, you got to go to school, you got to study. So 3 days a week is perfect for a college student.
Absolutely perfect. And one of those days is a Saturday open mat day, which is for new people coming. This is pivotal to making those incremental gains Miles was saying earlier. You come in on a Saturday, you get to kind of relax, shake off the structure of the week, and just have time. You can come with a buddy who's also new, if you want, and we play some music. It's more laid back, and we just all kind of learn together and drill whatever it is you want that day. But then during the week, Monday and Wednesday are big college nights. We have a lot of athletic guys that are out already getting a jump start on you people who have not started yet, and you're gonna have to face them when you come in. But it'll be a lot of fun learning along the way. And I remember that first time when somebody who used to choke me out with my own gi went for it, a blue belt when I was a white belt, and I was able to defend it for the first time, and I'll never forget that, because you never think that you're going to be able to get to a point where you can defend the move, and then you do, and then the next step is you use that move on the same person who uses it on you, and that's when you first notice. And there's really no secret besides showing up. So I thought there was this, that I could leave jiu-jitsu and go home and watch YouTube videos and read books about jiu-jitsu, and that was going to, improve my game. The thing that improved my game the most was when I made a commitment to start going every single day that I could. Every single day that I could, from beginning to end, not showing up 5 minutes late. During the summer, when I was completely dedicated, that's when I saw the most improvements. It's no secret other than showing up to the class.
Yeah, you need the structure. It's just like going to school. You can't do college by yourself. Yeah, you can go online and take the courses, but there's nothing like learning live in person. Especially in jiu-jitsu, because you need a sounding board. You need opponents to roll with to prove or disprove the theories and strategies and things that you've got in your head. Going on YouTube is great, but you cannot learn from YouTube, especially at the lower ranks where you don't have the base, the understanding, the experience yet to fully understand what you see on YouTube, because you can't feel anything. You just can visually see what's happening. In jiu-jitsu, you got to be able to feel the weight shifts, what we call base. It's just a lot going on. It's too hard to learn off of a computer screen.
And who better to learn from than Miles Moffit, world champion, owner of Southside Jiu Jitsu. We're going to close out real quick with Leonard Skinner, Free Bird, as I'm sure you'll love. But Miles, thank you so much for coming on the show. I had a great time.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Awesome. All right, we'll be back on Thursday with Jake Day at 7 o'clock around those parts. But once again, that was Miles Moffit, owner of Southside Jiu Jitsu, and this is Free Bird. We'll see you next week.
Thanks for coming in.